Hey guys, welcome to Chapter 8 of Readings from Gift of the Shaper. I'm your host, d.l.jennings. Today we're doing Chapter 8, which takes place in Derenar. The chains on Adrian's neck were as cold as they were heavy, and the scraping sound made him cringe as they dragged against the stone floor. He found himself struggling to walk as they pulled him down, but he knew if he slowed, even for a moment, he would be taking a sharp jab in the back from the big man behind him. "Let's go, Half-Eye," the man said, jabbing him again. "You should know better than anyone how demanding the Kith are." Kith, Adrian thought with a shiver. That explains the decor. He gathered up what strength he could find and kept walking. He hadn't been paying close attention to the details of the halls they'd walked down, but they all looked the same to him anyway. Stone wall after stone wall, over a stone floor, under a stone ceiling. The only sounds as they walked were the ones he made as he dragged his chains. It told him that they were most likely the only people being held captive. "In here," the big man grunted. He shoved Adrian hard enough to make him lose his balance and fall flat on his face, chains clanking loudly. Inches in front of him was a heavy wooden hatch on the floor, which his captor opened easily. Towering over Adrian, he gave him a swift kick that sent him tumbling down a set of old wooden stairs. "After you," he said, laughing loudly at his own joke. When Adrian hit the bottom, he had the wind knocked out of him as his chest landed right on a bunch of chains. He groaned weakly and sucked in a lungful of air to curse his luck. His oath was cut off, however, by a voice that gave him chills from down the hall. "Rimble," it said, "if you kill the Athrani before I've had the chance to work on him, you'll be joining him soon after." Raspy and low, the voice echoing through the cold stone enclosure, sounded less like a man's and more like a phantom that had somehow clawed its way back to life. "Now bring him in." Adrian squinted in the darkness, trying to see down the hallway and possibly catch a glimpse of the owner of the voice that scraped at his ears. But the path ahead, illuminated only by dim candles, further convinced him that the voice had no corporeal form. "He's fine, Master Decane," came the gruff reply from Rimble. "Just a little roughed up. Seemed content to take his time on the way here, so I had to help him along." "As long as he's alive, he'll do." Rimble leaned down and whispered, "Hear that, Athrani? All I gotta do is not kill you." Adrian felt the chains around him tighten as he found himself being lifted up. Rimble gave him a boot to the middle of his back that made him nearly lose his footing. He dragged the heavy chains behind him as they walked, prodded ever forward by the big man behind him. And as they walked past the expansive gray walls, he found himself wanting less and less to see what was waiting beyond them. After what seemed like an eternity, the hallway opened to a large round room. In the middle was a stone table with a black-robed figure standing beside it, with his back to them. He turned around, revealing a scorched and ravaged face streaked with scars. "Alive," the man said with a dark smile. "Let's see for just how long." His voice crackled and groaned like a burning log. Adrian's heart sank as he recognized the Master Kith for what he was. His face felt heavy as he drooped in dread. "Place him on the table," the Kith said. Approaching Adrian and looking straight at him, he said, "I hope he has something we can use." Eagerness and power burned behind his eyes. It was the eagerness that was most unnerving. Stay hydrated. Adrian looked down to a thin chain that hung from the Kith's neck, and what looked like an enormous tooth or a horn, huge, curved, and white. Rimble moved him over to the great stone slab and threw him on it roughly, jostling the chains and leaving him staring at the ceiling above. Adrian heard the clink as Rimble fastened each chain to a ring on the floor, securing him in place, and taking away the final hope of escape. Without the use of his hands, Adrian's shaping power was all but useless. "The other two are still in their cages," Rimble said. One of them tried to escape earlier, but I bashed him on the head before he could try anything. Decane looked at Rimble disapprovingly. I thought I told you to keep them chained up. He was chained up, Rimble countered. I think he must have figured a way out of them or something. But if he finds a way out again... Decane cut him off. See that he doesn't. Of course. But if by some unbelievable turn of events... Stop, Decane said sharply. Very well. He lifted the chain that hung from his neck and handed the horn to Rimble. You will return this to me when you've finished. Thank you, Master Kith, Rimble said as he pocketed the horn. Now bring out the Gwarai, Decane said. The word made Adrian's blood run cold as he started to feel faint. I'll be needing a second horn. Gwarai, the Night Stalkers, the Shape Eaters, wretched spawns of the Breaker that fed on blood and power in their time before the Shaping War, yet no one had seen one in... A sharp slap on his cheek forced Adrian back to the present as his eyes met the Kith's. I'll have none of that, servant of the anvil, Decane growled. This has killed quite a few of you before, but it doesn't have to. Although, he said as his lips curled into a sneer, you will no doubt wish it had. Begging would be fruitless, Adrian knew. He was a Kith prisoner, and Kith hated the Athrani more than anyone hated anything. No, begging would only bring him pain and humiliation. With a breath, he resigned himself to his fate. He heard Rimble's footsteps approaching again, trailed by a rhythmic click-clack, click-clack, that sounded like heavy talons striking stone. Then nausea dug its claws in him as his fear was made real. A Gwarai, here, in this room. His head reeled at the impossibility of it all. He craned his neck to try and see for himself, hoping beyond hope that it was a terrible lie, that everything he knew and felt was a deception. But when his eyes rested upon the creature, black and repulsive, he knew that he was seeing his end. The Gwarai was young, standing about 5 feet taller than Rimble, and had none of the scars and wounds that were described as typical of the ancient reptilian beasts. It was covered head to abominable toe in midnight black scales that made its penchant for night hunting all the more effective. And, though it walked on all fours, its powerful forelimbs were long, built for grabbing and tearing, so its head was several feet higher than its waist, giving it a hunched appearance. And atop its long, thick neck was a head with 2 great horns, each one white and curved, with points as sharp as daggers. Even when the Gwarai had stepped into the room, Adrian felt his power abandon him. The creatures had the terrifying and poorly understood ability to nullify Athrani shaping. Their mere presence snuffed it out, like water on a fire, leaving nothing but a void. Adrian felt his strength drain from him as the creature drew near, paralyzing him with fear and dread. The creature's cold yellow eyes looked him over hungrily, and Adrian could feel the warmth of its breath as it closed in. It was as if the Gwarai could sense it, the power of the other world, and were drawn to it. This one was already salivating at the presence of an Athrani, running its long tongue over rows of thin, sharp teeth, hungry for a taste of his blood. Its small, circular nostrils drank in the air as it drew closer, intoxicated with the aroma. Rimble, big as he was, struggled to keep it restrained, despite the masses of chains holding it back. The strength of the Gwarai lies in their thirst for the blood of Shapers, Decane began. Whatever lets them do it, block the ability to tap into the power of the other world, also lets them drain it. However, I've discovered, he said, looking rather pleased, that if they drain enough power, it can be collected. I'm particularly fond of taking their horns, he said, fingering the one around his neck, as they make for an impressive, if not functional, trophy. By now, Rimble was struggling mightily to contain the creature that commanded the room. He grabbed the chains that held the Gwarai by the throat as it hovered only inches away from Adrian's face. "Now what I need from you," Decane went on, "is just a bit of your power. Are you familiar with the pieces of the World Forge?" At first, Adrian was unsure whether the Kith was addressing him or simply speaking rhetorically. After a long silence, he croaked in answer. "Of course. All Othrani know the story. The Shaper used the hammer and the anvil to forge the chains that hold..." Decane slammed his hand down on the table. "The chains that hold the breaker," he seethed. He turned the palms of his hands to the ceiling and recited. "The breaker of dawn, the hammer of darkness, bound in his prison and resting in chains. Binder of worlds, the keeper of shadows. In her embrace, the world remains. Shaper of ages, the anvil of light, her power descended, her children, her might." Rimble, still struggling with the Gwarai, said loudly, "Who cares?" Decane lowered his hand slowly and turned to Rimble, the Kith's dark face displaying the grave seriousness that was thick in his voice. "The hammer of the World Forge, one of the very tools of creation, is within our grasp. When the Shaper of Ages gave herself to the Othrani and scattered the pieces throughout the world, she made it so that no Kith could ever wield the hammer, and no Othrani could ever break the chains. But the Breaker had other plans," he sneered. "And he made the Gwarai with his last bit of strength, making them ravenous for the power of the other world." He stopped and looked at the creature before him, almost marveling at it. Rimble spoke up again. "So that's why this one's so feisty." Decane nodded absently. "That which is broken always seeks to be remade whole. The pieces of the World Forge and the shaping ability of the Othrani were once one and the same." He looked at the Gwarai and again at Adrian. "Even now, the shaping power inside you is clawing at the surface, begging to be set free. Do you know why it is so important that we let it?" He turned to Rimble, his face expressionless. Rimble looked drained as his purely physical struggle had now turned mental. "So you can use the hammer of the World Forge?" Decane clapped his hands together several times in mock applause. "And free the Breaker from his chains." He clasped his hands in front of his face in exasperation. "Now, loose the Gwarai," he whispered. The Othrani's terror was as sharp as the scream that left his lungs. At the words of his master, Rimble dropped the only thing holding the monstrous beast back, and it lunged forward with unholy quickness and veracity, snapping its jaws open to reveal a set of needle-like fangs that sprung forth from their concealment in its mouth. Adrian felt the Gwarai's dagger-like teeth sink in as the creature clamped its jaws around his shoulder and upper chest and began to drink deeply. The pain that coursed through Adrian's body was unlike any he'd ever felt. The fangs of the beast, sharp and terrible, were just the beginning. Perhaps it was the emptiness that he felt, the sudden absence of something so formative to his entire identity that made him ache. Whatever it was, the feeling of powerlessness he felt had now overtaken him completely. He was sluggish and cold. When the Gwarai had entered the room, he'd felt himself weaken as if he'd lost the power to stand. Now, with the creature feeding on him, he felt as if his connection with the other world had been severed. It was like his legs had been cut off, and he would never walk again. The distinct odor of perspiration, dirt, and red meat hit Adrian all at once as Rimble appeared behind the Gwarai. He reached out to grab the chain around the creature's neck, and, at his touch, the feeding stopped. "You've done well, Rimble," Decane said as he tossed him a pouch of coins. "Cage our beast, and bring the other Othrani to me. Use the horn only as a last resort. I must attend to my work," he said as he turned to leave, flicking his hands to part the stone wall that contained his study. "Our search for the blood of the Shaper continues." With those words, the wall closed behind him, leaving Rimble standing and staring at nothing. The big man grunted and yanked on the chain, commanding the head of the huge black beast away from Adrian. Adrian watched them leave as he struggled to move atop the cold stone table. He tried several times to move his hand to his chains, but found the effort exhausting and let it simply drop to his side. Lying there, staring at the dead stone ceiling, he realized now what Decane had meant. Though he was alive, as the Kith had said, he wanted nothing more to have died along with his hope. Burdened with the curse of a life without shaping, Adrian closed his eyes and wept. Hey guys, so I just finished doing the reading for Chapter 8. If you haven't seen any of the previous 7 chapters, this is basically like a sort of a companion series to the book. You're getting the chance for me to, I'm reading the chapters for you, but I'm also sort of explaining, the basis for the characters, motivation behind writing them, giving you some insights. So if you're unfamiliar and you'd want to check out the first 7 chapters, under my YouTube channel under playlists, you can just click on that, and I've got all 7 chapters up already. So it's just called Readings from Gift of the Shaper. So go ahead and check it out. So chapter 8, we met one of the 2 Athrani prisoners. There's Dylas, and then of course there's Adrian. So Adrian was the Athrani who got dragged off first. Basically, the last chapter we had no idea kind of why he was being dragged off, but in this chapter we found out that so not only is a Kith behind it, but there has also been sort of this resurrection of one of the, kind of like really like a monster of legend, more or less, the Gorai. So the Gorai, as we kind of learn in this chapter, are these, awful, fearsome beasts that basically feed on the blood of Athrani and, the blood of, as it's called, the blood of the Shaper. So actually that was like a working title for my book for a while. And I decided it kind of sounded too intense, so I ended up going with Gift of the Shaper, which obviously I love. So, but the book was very close to being titled Blood of the Shaper. So, who knows? Maybe I'll do it for a sequel or something. So the Gorai, they're these huge, long, black creatures. They're, basically like I thought of it sort of like a cross between like a dragon and like a snake, and kind of with a long elongated body of like, a gorilla, because it's got that slanted, upward, these like long forearms. So it's kind of like, it doesn't look like a corgi or anything like that. It's got sort of like a, that slanted kind of posture that gorillas have, if you picture like a silverback or something like that. So it's a bizarre mental image that I found very difficult to put into words, but so maybe I can get some fans out there who draw better than I can imagine and give me some art to work with or something. So obviously the big event in chapter 8 was learning that the Gorai feed on the blood of Shapers, specifically the Athrani, and kind of they can save the power in their horns, basically. So the horns are actually another thing that originally I had not written in. I had what I called shaping stones, and I wasn't really too sure about the idea of how to store energy. Eventually, I came around to the idea of the Gorai. They drink your blood. They have like a power reservoir inside of them, so the power goes to their horns. It's it basically goes throughout their whole body. So I kind of really like that idea. It's like it permeates every cell. So obviously Decane enjoys sawing off the horns or whatever and using them as trophies. So obviously he uses the horns for his own purposes, which, as we discovered in this chapter, he seeks to wield the Hammer of the World Forge. So we'll see if he ends up accomplishing that goal. Thanks for stopping by. Stay tuned for Chapter 9, which will be, hopefully I'll be doing next week. See you guys next time.